Good day and welcome back. This is the next video in my series on corresponding squares, where I take a detailed look at that endgame concept. Now, so far we've considered a number of theoretical positions and simpler compositions, and we've been using particularly the work of Charles and Speelman to guide us on our way. Today I'm moving on to some of the more complicated and interesting compositions involving corresponding squares, which were made about 100 years ago. The famous one we'll be moving on to is Lasker-Reichholm. But today we're looking at an earlier example from 1892 by Charles Dealtry Locock. Now, the position is there on the thumbnail, and before I move on, where you get some spoilers, it's worthwhile you have a look at that position and try your best at solving it. Now remember, the process is, first of all, you work out the key squares, which is white gets the key square, he wins the game, and then work backwards from that and where are the corresponding squares. Now, the other thing I'm changing a little bit today is I'm going to use this as an opportunity to highlight a bit of the history behind some of these composers, which they don't get much attention by and large, and they were sort of active at a very fertile time for the time of chess. 1892, that's just after, Steinitz has become the first world champion, and around that time you have obviously the great players of Schigger and Lasker and so on, who we know quite a fair bit about. And beneath that, there's a layer of these very strong players and composers and a lot of interest in chess at that time. So just let me switch over to my capture screen and we'll have a look at a few of these things. First off, so this is the Wikipedia page for Charles Dealtry Locock. We can see he's born 1862, lived in 1946, and a lot of the normal features you'd think of, chess players at that time. First of all, well educated. He went to Oxford University, and then he was a publisher on not just chess. You look down here, he's got a chess book, 120 chess problems and puzzles, but he also wrote on Shelley and did some translations for some Swedish work, which ended up in a movie which had Laurence Olivier, but a bit of name dropping in there. And then when you think of Shelley himself, the only thing I remember for that is Ozymandias. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Locock himself was a little bit of a chess player. I thought I'd look into that. Now here's the games which we've got on chessgames.com, and he won a amateur tournament, and then he played in the 4th British Chess Association, I assume, Congress in Bradford. You look at the playoff table there. He did okay. He got what is it, 6.5. And there are some great players of the past actually playing in this tournament. Gunsberg, von Bardeleben, Weiss is a very strong player. Byrne, I assume that's Amos Byrne, Blackburn, and Bird. So you can see that's the sort of players that were active at the time of Locock coming up with his composition. Now, the position we look at is very famous. You can see I'm looking now at the chess programming wiki. It's actually the example they are using to demonstrate the corresponding squares. So this is actually, it shows the solution on this page, so hopefully you solved it already. And I'm not using this, but it's very similar. The Speelman sort of goes through the same process and analysis. So obviously this is a famous example if it's being sort of used as the test case on chess programming wiki. Now, interesting thing about this corresponding square system, we'll do the matching out already. Now, there's this algorithm by Mosam, which I coded up quite a while ago. I can't get it to spit out the results which I want. And one of the part of the problems is that when you look at this, there's a simplification where using 1 as a square marker over and over again, which is fine for if you're sort of going through the analysis in your head, but it's actually not reality, because that 1 square there is not on B4 is not the same as the 1 square on F6. Close Firefox and move to the analysis of the board itself. Now, what we need to look for, key squares, and what are the key squares? And the other change I've made is I've put a lot of markings on beforehand because I made it a bit smoother. Okay, key squares. Key squares are E5 and F4. Let's just have a look at that. Move 1 square forwards. I've marked them up there, and then you can see I've also marked up. I've just started getting on to corresponding squares. But we'll do that in a second. Let's just clarify why those two squares are the key squares. In fact, I'd like to point out that the thing about the e5 square being a key square is that it's being able to push the pawn to e5. Okay, so let's just demonstrate that is the two key squares. So let's say, now remember, if the black king was on f6, we couldn't push the pawn, but in this case, we can push the pawn. Now, black takes is one line, black takes, white takes back, and you can see that what's going to happen is that this pawn's going to drop and it'll be a win for white. So let's actually go back and say, what if black doesn't take? Let's say black just holds ground. Then white just cross, and then black has to make a choice. If he takes the pawn on e5, then we transpose back to where white will win because he'll pick up the g4 pawn. And if he doesn't, then we'll be in a position to take the pawn on d6 first and pawn. You can see that's why if white's able to push e5, it is a win. So let's go back, just clarify the other key square. So let's say we do not stop white from getting to the f4 square, and once again this g4 pawn going to block. Even if black got to h5 on this move, then white would be, pawn's going to drop anyway. So I hope that's clear. So having established the two key squares, now we move backwards using corresponding squares. And let's say I've marked these up first. So to find out the corresponding squares, if white is on d4, then he is threatening to push e5. Black must stop that. Black can only stop that from f6. And if white is on e3, threatening to go f4, the only square from which black can stop that from is on the g5 square. So that's the first mapping corresponding squares. Now this is just the process. Corresponding square. If white's on d3, we can go to corresponding square number 1 or corresponding square number 2. Black must find a matching square. The only matching square is g6 in that case. So that's all good. That's a little triangle formation. We see that a lot in our corresponding square positions. So let's just have a look at what the next combination is. I've done this in steps, map out in a simple way, because we're going to fill in those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 squares around the original triangle of 3. And I just want to demonstrate a clear example of the first case of it so that we can understand what's going on. And you can see that if white's on the c3 square, then he's threatening to go to square number 1 and square number 3. Okay, that's fine. But he's also threatening to go to another square, in this case d2, which is a square away from the 2 square, right? And he's also threatening to go to c4 and then to d4, i.e. triangulating to get to the square number 1. If you look at all those combinations, you can see the only square which actually matches that is the square g7. Match that with the arrows, right? So that's where this number 5 square comes from. Number 7 square, exactly the same thing. Number 7, at a simple level, you've got to be able to cover squares 2 and 3, but you've also got to be able to cover going through square 5 to get to square 1 and going through the unmarked square at the moment, which is e4 to get to the e3 square. So once again, 7 is the only corresponding square there, which is d2 matched by h6. If you look at the c4 square, that's threatening to go number 1, number 5, and that is only matched by the f7 square on the black side. And then if you look at the e2 square, threatening to go to number 2 and number 7, and that is only matched by the h5 square. And then now we fill in the corner. So we've got the c2 square threatening to go to 5 and 3 and 7. And the only square which matches that on the black side is square number h7. Go back to one of our favorite guys, Speelman. White is position number 111. White is aiming to get in e5 or king f4. So king d4 versus king f6 is Sungswang. The rest of the correspondences follow in the usual way, but we should note that squares on the A file, this is why I stopped here, are too far away from d4 to coordinate with the appropriate black ones. Black will win if the white king decided to go way over here, and depending on the black, you could actually run up here and grab the e pawn. So bear that in mind. So that's good. got to think about the sort of the counterattack possibilities if you're triangulating or something so far away. So can't go to the A file, so the last set of corresponding squares are going to be the ones on the back rank and then the B file. Let's move on with our corresponding square example. Okay, so here's the next example where I've just put the whole layer in and I've explained why, right? If you look at the B3 square, which is a green B, then that was the same situation where it's certainly go to 4 and 5 and 6, right? And you can triangulate through to go to A and then the 4. So you need to find the matching square, and the matching square, B3 square, will be the G8 square. And you can see how all the other squares match in with that A, B, C, D, E, G, matches around that way. And you can see there are those extra layer of squares, which white has, D, E, F, G, but because there's enough, you can see this a lot of interaction in the row above 6, 7, 8 to 2, 3, 5, that doesn't actually give white extra combinations. Okay, so let's move on to the next mapping step where you can see I've double marked the A as a 1, the B as a 3, and the C as a 7. Now this is not necessary, but it's a good simplification. What you're able to do is with steps of 2 in this corresponding square, you're able to sort of reuse the same number. And as long as you're on that sort of horizontal tab, the ones will be expanded. So in fact, if we were to continue the pattern, this would be 4 here, 5 there, 6 there. And then you're able to expand the pattern going down as well. So the 2 there, 3 there, 5 there, and then the diagonals, the same deal. Now that's justified because the gap of 2 means that they don't sort of overlap. And at the end of the day, though, you could just leave it as the original sort of higher numbering and lettering, which I have been using. Right. Okay. So having said that, we now have the what is the solution to the problem as proposed. Okay. So let's play through the line which Speelman gives. King B1, exclam, King G7, move towards the key squares. Square is on now number 5, so we match that. We go into what corresponds to a number 5 square, which is King to a C1, and then King G6 by black. That's corresponding to square number 3, so we will hop on to our corresponding square number 3. It'll be D1 to continue. King G5, so black has run straight for the squares, doesn't really matter. Black is on a square number 2, but also he can access a 1, a 3, a 7, or an 8. So the trick here, C2, a bypass. That's what Speelman is calling it. So that now we can, whichever square he goes to, we'll be able to match King H6, for instance. So black's gone back to 7. So we go to a square mark 7. So you can see that little maneuver there, kind of a triangulation, more difficult for black to match, and we're now closer to the square number 2. So we're always threatening to get to the E3 square now. Let's continue. King to H5, which is now marked number 8. This is where there's another bypass. I think King E2 is also adequate. King C3. So we're on square number 5, and you can see that black cannot reach square number 5. Be able to reach square number 1, which we're threatening to go to with our next move. So black moves to G5 according to Speelman. King C4, square number 4. Black can't match. G6, square number 3, and then now we're going to hop onto our square number. Game over. King F6. Now we go King 7. Push the pawn. Anyway, we'll just do this line. I mean, this is what I covered a little bit earlier. If we take lock. In fact, Speelman suggests D6 check first. Pawn. Round. Okay, so that gives you a general sense. Let's. I think there's one more line which Speelman gives in there, but you can see that the sort of the gradual process of moving on to squares which black is already on we're moving on to a corresponding square where black is 2 squares away from it and can't move on to and make your way towards the key squares, which is what we were able to do in that position. And just to close out, let's have a quick look at my sort of Venn diagram layout. You can see that I haven't mapped out the whole process here. And you can see there's the key squares, the corresponding squares, and also what you'll notice is that on this sort of transitions, actually it's matched, right? So we said that king b1 is a win with white to move. So I forgot to demonstrate the other line where if it is black to move, king g7 and king h7 both draw. So let's have a quick look at that. We'll just go back to the, so with black to move in this position, draws are going to g7 or h7. And you can see the reason for that is moved on to squares marked 5 or squares marked 6, which white cannot move on to. And then if white proceeds to go on to the square mark 7 or square mark 3, then of course we can match it in different ways. Yep. So I hope that sort of shows you the situation here. Actually, it's not a guaranteed win for one side or the other. It depends who's to move. And that goes back to this diagram. Everything's matched. So as long as black can move on to his corresponding square, then he'll draw. If white can move on to black's corresponding square, way of looking at it is that white win. Okay, I hope you found that interesting. We get a little bit of history about Charles Dealtry Locock, as well as the mapping of his corresponding squares in his famous example from 1892. Thank you very much for listening.